At 11 p.m. on a cold April evening, a uniformed Army intelligence officer made his rounds outside a nondescript Holiday Inn near Fort Meade, Maryland. The hallway was nearly empty, lit by flickering fluorescent lights, when a faint glow under room 209's door caught his eye. He got the hotel manager to open the door and peered inside. Welcome to the Sheldrake Files. On the worn motel carpet lay a man, fully dressed in civilian clothes, motionless at the foot of a small desk. 2 chairs had been stacked beside a bedside lamp. The lamp's cord had been cut, its wires stripped to bare copper. Those wires looped around the man's arms, and the plug remained jammed in the socket. Blood trickled from his broken nose onto the carpet. In the sudden silence, it looked like a horrible accident, or something far worse. His name was Ralph Sigler. He was a Chief Warrant Officer 3, age 47, and a veteran counterintelligence agent in the U.S. Army. He had served for nearly 30 years. Tonight, he was discovered by his own service, and the Army would soon rule it a suicide. But many would later believe something about the scene just didn't add up. Ralph Sigler had not been a spy by accident. He was born in 1928 in a small village of then Czechoslovakia. By the time he was 8 years old, his family had emigrated to the United States. The young boy grew up fully American. At 17, he enlisted in the U.S. Army, eager to prove himself in the country that had become his new home. He served throughout the late 1940s and 50s, learning electronics and languages along the way. Friends said he was humble and focused, earning steady promotions. In 1960, Ralph married Ilse, a German-born nurse he'd met while stationed in Germany. They built a home near Fort Bliss, Texas, and had a daughter, Karen. Sigler proved himself reliable and disciplined. By the late 1960s, he was a seasoned warrant officer, highly respected for his technical know-how. He had no way of knowing that this background would soon make him the Army's perfect secret weapon. By the late 1960s, the Cold War had become a global shadow game. The Army needed men who could bluff the Soviets. In 1968, Ralph Sigler was selected for a new kind of mission. He would pretend to betray his country, feeding Moscow false secrets. Under the cover of a counterintelligence assignment at Fort Bliss, he began his double life. By day, he taught radar systems to soldiers. By night, he slipped behind the Iron Curtain in imagination. He underwent briefings and tradecraft training. He memorized fake histories and cover stories. When it was time, he donned a plain dark suit and boarded planes to Europe. In Munich or Zurich under a dim light, he posed as a disgruntled American willing to sell military secrets. In one of his first meetings in 1969, a KGB officer asked if he really hated the United States. Sigler met the man's eyes and said softly, "I just want to do what's best for my family." Inside, his heart pounded, but outwardly, he was the perfect traitor. In each meeting, Sigler delivered what looked like classified schematics of U.S. missiles and radar. The Soviets eagerly counted the cash they paid him, never realizing the papers were intentionally flawed. In one case, he handed over detailed plans to an advanced missile system. When the Soviets built it, U.S. analysts watched and laughed as the Russian tests failed miserably. Every time a Soviet rocket blew up on the pad, American counterintelligence quietly celebrated. Sigler himself felt grim satisfaction. From a safe distance, he learned that each piece of deceptive data helped save lives on the other side. Meanwhile, Sigler also gathered real intelligence. He noted the faces and the names of the Soviet agents who dealt with him. In a secret arrangement with Army intelligence, he fed leads to the FBI. One major success involved a Soviet master spy named Rudolf Herman, who was currently working undercover in the United States. Sigler recognized Herman from old KGB files and alerted the FBI, leading to Herman's eventual arrest. The Kremlin, however, saw Sigler as one of their own, a celebrated asset. They even flew him around in private jets and threw parties in his honor. Sigler, who turned every ruble he earned over to the U.S. Army, played the role so convincingly that very few, even in U.S. intelligence, knew his true loyalty. To the outside world, Sigler suddenly appeared to have struck it rich. He bought a nicer house in El Paso and drove a new car, telling Ilsa it was from an Army allowance for his foreign consulting. In truth, every Soviet payment went straight to Army accounts. No one but Ilsa knew their savings remained modest. To maintain his cover, Sigler downplayed any appearance of wealth. His real reward came in classified briefings. After each mission, superiors praised him for the latest Russian failures. They never pinned medals on his uniform, but in his official Army personnel file he received note after note of thanks from top intelligence officers. Ralph knew he couldn't thank them openly, but he felt proud. As one general later put it, Sigler turned ghost stories into our advantage. All the while, Ilsa simply saw her husband as a dedicated soldier. She had no idea he was a key figure in deceiving the Soviets, not even when he sometimes arrived home quietly with dark circles under his eyes after a long trip. After years of deception, the burden on Sigler grew heavy. By 1973, he was exhausted, feeling the lies within him jostle with his conscience. He began to question his own story. One evening after dinner, he sat at the kitchen table, papers strewn around him, and admitted to Ilsa, "They made me sell our country," he said, his voice shaking. "I don't like what they make me do." Ilsa was startled. Sigler never spoke of his work in such terms. He drew in a breath, then continued quietly, "It's getting too deep. I'm not sure what's real anymore." Ilsa reached for his hand, but he pulled away gently, trying not to frighten her. On the outside, others were asking questions too. The Army had introduced him to every agent in the field, and now they wondered, had some real secret slipped through? In 1974, Sigler started collecting notes for the memoir he planned to write after his retirement, a collection of work diaries and mission summaries. Rumors reached some in the Pentagon that he had a stack of classified papers at home. Intelligence officers grew anxious about what he may expose. In early 1976, orders came down. Ralph Sigler was to report to Fort Meade, Maryland. In late March, Sigler arrived for a routine debriefing. It quickly turned into a relentless interrogation. For 9 days, he was confined to 2 motel rooms on base, under watch. Flashing fluorescent lights buzzed overhead around the clock. Army intelligence officers, including Colonel Louis Martel, demanded to know everything. Where was this hidden file? Why had he gathered so many notes? Throughout one grueling session, Sigler watched a polygraph meter cross back and forth. He believed his answers were true, but the Army later claimed that he had told the Soviets more than allowed. Each day of questioning felt like a test of will. Sigler was given endless lie detector tests. He would sweat through them, but he honestly answered every question. After every test, he was allowed only brief breaks, just enough to bolt the door and catch his breath. He longed for a comforting word from Ilsa, but the thin motel curtains meant the night was always silent. No phone calls were permitted. By night, he sat on the empty bed, staring at the stark ceiling. Outside, guards paced. The next morning, the interrogation would start all over again. On the night of April 12, 1976, desperation overtook him. It was past midnight, and Sigler's hands trembled as he dialed his home number in El Paso. Ilsa answered, and there was confusion in her sleepy voice. Sigler's own voice quivered as he whispered urgently, "Listen to me. Get a lawyer. I'm dying. I never lied." In the silence that followed, he added softly, "If the tests go well, they might let me go tomorrow. Be a good girl." Then the line went dead. Ilsa raced to Ralph's boss's office that night, a senior Army officer, to relay what her husband had just said. The next morning, on April 13th, the warning proved tragically far-sighted. An Army investigator and the hotel night manager quietly opened room 209, bracing for the worst. The scene was grim. Ralph Sigler lay lifeless on the floor next to the toppled chairs. Beside him, the lamp was still warm, plugged into the wall. His body was rigid on the carpet. The stripped lamp cord ran from the outlet across his biceps, then to the lamp. A plastic cup of water sat on the nightstand, apparently used to conduct the electricity. On the desk was his final note, scrawled in shaky handwriting. Investigators later read lines like, "I have given up all hope. I tried too hard. I'm dead." The words ended abruptly. Some pages were torn out. Army investigators would note the cause of death as high-voltage electrocution. The wounds on Sigler's arms matched where the cord had burned him. There was blood on the carpet from his nose and a slight bruise on his jaw. The door was locked from inside, and there were no footprints or signs of a struggle. To the Army and the Maryland police, it was the scene of a suicide. But to everyone who knew Ralph Sigler, it was a puzzle. In that stark room, Sigler was gone, just like the secrets he carried. By that afternoon, the Army and the police had their story. Ralph Sigler had committed suicide. They explained it as a tragic mental breakdown, a man under immense pressure who chose a gruesome way out. Colleagues reported he'd been withdrawn and tense since the interrogations began. Investigators pointed to the note and the phone call as evidence of his despair. In a carefully worded announcement, military officials quickly deemed the case closed. But outside official channels, others whispered skepticism. Ilsa refused to believe her husband took his own life. She recalled him as a determined and proud soldier, not a broken man. Some Army doctors privately wondered if a 110-volt lamp cord could inflict such fatal injuries unless something or someone had interfered. One retired general contemplated to a reporter, "The Soviets were known to use electric torture after all." Authors Joe and Susan Trento, who later wrote about the case, argued it was a murder staged as a suicide, possibly by foreign agents who realized Sigler was actually a double agent working for the United States. In El Paso, Ilsa even filed a lawsuit against Army officials, accusing them of a cover-up. But in 1980, a federal judge threw it out under the Ferris Doctrine, which bans active duty military service members from suing the government for incidents connected to their duties. Officially, the Army never reopened the investigation, and no new autopsy details were ever released. Ralph Sigler was buried with full military honors at Fort Bliss National Cemetery in Texas under a simple headstone. His medals and awards would be tucked away in classified files. Today, his name appears only in archive citations and occasional footnotes of Cold War history. The truth of that April night, suicide or murder, remains locked in silence. Ralph Sigler's story quickly faded from the headlines, but for a brief time it roused many questions and suspicions. The strange marks on Sigler's body, and the unanswered questions they raised, were later highlighted in newspapers and a 1979 TV broadcast. By the 1980s, some intelligence veterans and authors asked the same question. Who killed Ralph Sigler? Or did he really kill himself? The CIA and Army reports remained classified. The FBI and CIA would not comment. All that lingered were the eyewitnesses' memories and the troubling gaps in the official record. To this day, Ralph Sigler remains largely unknown except to a few who specialize in espionage history, but among them, his name is not forgotten. He is remembered as a patriot who walked in the enemy's shadow, decoy and decider, until his final breath. His life was one of service and secrecy, and even in death he became another secret of the Cold War. The mystery lives on, a soldier of secrets who took his truth with him into the darkness.